It's called Fearless. That's
you get.
Are you gonna climb?
no, I'm gonna go get my Chipotle.
That's true.
No, someone down the line.
Push on.
Hi, welcome.
Hello. I'm Amy.
Oh, Amy, we're gonna have to go outside and come around, okay?
Oh, okay.
It's no problem.
Okay. I had someone kind of direct me, so I just kind of followed.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
I think it's okay. It's like you like drive this way. Way for hates with your eyes. He's like eventually we can insert you out.
I did. I knew I was.
He was upfront about it, so I guess and he was agreeing. Save my life. It's like in limbo. It's like the other person.
How was the weekend? Is Olivia late? Yeah.
Emails. It's gonna come apart this week. Weird.
Okay, I was gonna say.
That's snail.
I still wish you were a peacock, but like, he's kind of cute.
That's what I did.
Oh.
I was talking about like
Queer.
this weekend.
Chair that like.
That's therefore it's mine.
And she's like,
There's no meat, so.
It's like something that's about to happen. But apparently they heard.
I was like, come down on Wednesday. Come Tuesday. Yeah. And it's a weekend.
I didn't know he was a dog. You just said animal. So I'm like,
Yeah.
peacock is something with a dragon. We'll find out.
Plus, I'm learning that
He's a sentient piece of fried chicken.
I support
not
that.
inaccurate.
Sorry. That was a little. No.
I was thinking chicken and fried chicken.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's gonna be Lee and Brandy or just Brandy. She said she
Done something bad.
she's bad.
Like, oh.
He was gonna make it. Just meet up with them. They're on the road. He's running. Oh. After this.
Are they driving to
Yes.
I love your list.
Thank you. I like this too. We can just trade.
So you're one.
I've had these since I was 16 years old.
Nice.
These are my children.
Yeah, and then the clip. You have to see mine. I love pandemic. It just wasn't that warm when I walked here.
Oh, it wasn't that warm when I walked here either. I just was like a masochist, so.
I have 45 minutes on the train.
Oh, okay, yeah, I live 4 blocks away.
Yeah, I
A
don't.
little different.
I live a lot further away.
Yeah.
So there's like the opportunity.
And they call everything.
Wait, it's so bad. It's so bad. It's like
Thanks.
it's my love.
It messed up.
Yeah, like I was speaking so much. And I would make it come so sick.
I don't know when.
The food was so boring.
Thank you. How are you feeling?
Like when I was on a liquid diet, I had shoes on.
online good.
I don't know about his actual.
Oh, they do. Alex has his license. Maddie has her own. So yeah.
Working together.
So there's Harry. That's Lee.
Both organizations don't necessarily.
Yeah, stories are right.
Both the organizations and the organization are like.
Our last night.
Recording is like.
Well, no, EJ after.
So we booked this.
Zach is smart.
We stayed there.
Very accomplished person. Of like
I was excited we get a
level
new
of
team.
organization.
So Ryan,
She brought up some tents.
It's like dedication.
so I met.
Really?
I mean, knows your voice, just not your face.
It took like this semester we finally like now we first meet.
Yeah.
Big open.
Really young, so we all started.
Yeah.
And
Somehow Chipotle is eating dates Tuesday. I was just heat it up and everything melts together. It's like the cheese and stuff. So good. It's just like a bowl of happy.
You have Chipotle right now?
I got Chipotle yesterday. And I like.
I told Maddie like 2 hours. You know, them all.
This is good though.
When I go to Georgia and like when they have their house, when I go to Georgia, I did in a whole day because they live like.
I found out.
All the way around.
That's where I'm informed.
And
Hey everyone, sorry.
Yeah, that is ridiculous that there's
Sorry, just a few minutes.
not a very
easier.
ABA for like the whole day. So like
ADA
Randy would like go
We're talking about that.
and hope to spend the night.
At the
And
table.
then
Hi.
and then hope
Email Gang on IG. It is a business run by my friend. You can buy shirts. They have men's and women's clothing.
I'm gonna start
And they also
crying
have workout
right
clothing.
now.
we were down there.
I really like Is his name Jay? I don't know. His shirt is black, but she's like feminist. Yeah, he was so
Did that.
Hey, we're gonna get started in just a few seconds. Lydia is on their way. They had to park on Pennsylvania because the school is disgusting.
Hey, I'll still take that.
Did you get food?
That did not benefit you. Or
I haven't gotten candy yet. This isn't from your office.
I know. I didn't give it to you. I gave you a big box yesterday.
I ate half of it last night. It was on accident.
It was not on accident. It's on purpose, but it's okay. The last box is for final.
Look, there they are. Hi, Lydia. Lydia.
What do you want,
this
sir?
is-
What are you? Very curious.
Oh, Lydia. Erica's down.
Oh God. He's gonna get some.
No. It's just not quite on the side. I mean, he's different, so. But I was so thankful because pictures are great. So, yeah. I can't tell them that. Even when, yeah, when I'm birds too,
Are you saying that if you could? Yeah, no, that's why I was saying. That I've seen her so many times. Like,
Awesome. So I think we're ready. I feel so weird standing behind everyone. They didn't set that up properly.
Oh, the podium moves?
No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't touch it.
Well, there were wires down there, so
It actually comes up through the floor.
And
I moved it back. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Hi, I don't have any prepared remarks because that's how I roll. Thank everyone for coming. Super appreciate it. We have 5 amazing panelists who are going to share their experiences and their knowledge with all of us. This is brought to you by the Atypical Student Society. We are a neurodiverse org at GW who's looking to change the climate, stigma, all that cool stuff. Check out our bios because I don't have anything written down. Everyone should have the panelist bios. If you don't have them, they're up there. Please sign in because we need to say that people came so we don't have to pay for this ourselves, get food, and then I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll go through a few questions, and then we can just chit-chat for a little bit, if that's okay. Does any panelist have a preference of who goes first?
No preference.
Oh, that's awesome. So someone should volunteer then, I guess.
I can go first at the end.
Okay, cool.
So I'm Beth Colby. I'm a 7th year associate at Sidley Austin here in DC. I've been there ever since I graduated law school out in California. My practice is focused on healthcare regulatory and policy work, so I also do some lobbying on the Hill, do a lot with coverage issues. I really love it. And then all my pro bono work I do on disability issues. I was just talking about some of the pro bono work I've done that's kind of partnered with NDRN. I also, in law school, I was president of the National Association of Law Students with Disabilities, so I have a lot of experience with students asking about accommodations and bar exam issues and disclosure issues. So happy to talk about anything, happy to talk about my experiences at Sidley. I'm very happy there. We've done a lot, I think, since I joined to become more disability accessible. I mean, when I started, there was a huge diversity committee, but there wasn't always specific inclusion of disability within the diversity umbrella. And since I've started, I've made it a point to make sure that it always is. So our mentorship programs, our diversity programs all include disability, and something I'm very passionate about.
Well, I'll go next. My name is Amy Scherer, and I'm a staff attorney at the National Disability Rights Network here in DC. And how many of you have actually, or has anybody ever heard of the PNA or the Protection and Advocacy Network?
Do I count? Or I don't count?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll explain a little bit about that because that will provide some context for what I do. The Protection and Advocacy Network is a congressionally mandated program that exists in every state and territory. So we're in the 50 states plus Guam, Puerto Rico, Northern Marianas, and I'm forgetting 2 others, but the other 2 territories. And essentially, we provide legal advocacy support for disability issues in every state and territory, and that includes everything from healthcare to transportation to education to employment to Social Security. Basically, the entire realm of disability issues are covered by our offices. And the National Disability Rights Network, where I work, is the membership organization for all of those offices. So they belong to our organization, and then in return for that, they get training and technical assistance from us. So at NDRN here in DC, I'm not going into court and representing individual clients on issues, but I may get a call from Michigan, our Michigan office, and they're working on a particular issue, and they may say, can you review this brief, or can you provide some advice on the strategy that you would take with this issue? And then we go from there. And the way that my office is set up is that each attorney basically has their own area, so then depending upon what the call is or what the email is, then that gets directed to that person. And my area primarily is employment and working with the vocational rehabilitation system to help individuals get jobs and to deal with issues related to that. And as Beth was just saying, we just found out in the first 5 minutes of meeting each other that our jobs overlap somewhat because she has done some work with our Ohio office. So it's amazing what a small world it can be. But I've been at NDRN for about 9 years, and one of the things that I wanted to say to this group is that internships are really important because I actually interned at NDRN during my summer after my 2nd year and kind of fell in love with DC. I'm originally from Atlanta, but I really like DC, and the public transportation system made my life a lot easier and made me much more independent. And I was hoping that I'd be able to come back, but I still had a year left in law school in St. Louis, Missouri. But it worked out that when I finished, there was a job available at NDRN, and I know that there were a lot of people that had more experience than I did, but I was told at a much later date that because they knew me from the internship, that really made a difference, and that led to me getting the offer. So just something to keep in mind as you progress through your law school career.
My name is Savannah Mixon. I'm a practicing trial attorney down in Boca Raton, Florida. I head up our division of trucking litigation, which means I deal a lot with traumatic brain injuries as well as spinal cord issues. Before I did that, I worked in employment law, with a lot of healthcare with the ADA, Federal Medical Leave Act, a lot of work with those who were disabled and therefore discriminated by their employer because of it. So I'm just going to kind of lend whatever input I can give from a litigation standpoint and working with people who have suffered these types of injuries and what it means for us as attorneys in helping advocate for those kinds of individuals.
Hi, my name is Lydia Brown. I use pronouns they, them, or just my name. I'm currently a Justice Catalyst Fellow at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. That's a newer project-based fellowship, so if you're thinking about applying for a SCADN or an EJW, Justice Catalyst is also an option. And in my work at Bazelon, I represent disabled students in Maryland who are facing various forms of school pushout, disproportionate discipline, or criminalization, most often due to intersections of race, gender, and disability. And outside of that work, I've been a community organizer and a policy advocate for about 10 years, working in the areas of disability rights and disability justice. I really hate the DC question, so what do you do? So my go-to answer to make people go away and leave me alone and stop judging me by my job title is just, I'd say I piss off white people, just very flatly. Then usually if they're the kind of person that was just trying to judge me by my job title and decide if that meant I was worth talking to, they walk away very quickly after that, and I can enjoy the delicious cheese hors d'oeuvres at whatever event I've crashed. So I've been doing a lot of work in disability advocacy, activism, and organizing. Now I'm unfortunately barred and licensed to practice as an attorney, and here in DC, but my work is in Maryland. And Haley and I sort of know each other kind of through the internet. But I'm really happy to be here with you all and to answer questions that you might have and hopefully shed light on what it means to be doing work at the nexus of community organizing and legal advocacy, because it's not something that a lot of folks do, and it's very important to me in that my background is first and foremost as an organizer, not as an attorney.
Hey, Haley, you're kind of frozen. Can you hear? Can you see? Or just leave? Okay. I think she's gonna try back.
Haley, if you're talking, we don't know whatever you're saying, so you could even be reading X-rated porn and we wouldn't know. Don't do that.
Haley says she can still hear everyone, but we can't see her, or see or hear her. So as soon as her face comes back, we will get her introduction. Her stuff's in the bio packets. So in the interest of time, we'll get to the first question, and this is open to anyone on the panel who wants to take it. I grabbed the wrong sheet of paper. Give me just a second. Cool, I have the right piece of paper now. So the first question is, what advice would you give a current law student who is unsure about disclosing to their school or potential employer? And I'll open that for anyone.
I'm happy to take that one on. I was diagnosed in law school with anxiety. And
all right, so I can hear, but I can't see.
Yeah, we can hear you, Haley.
Okay, I can hear, but I can't see everyone, so.
Haley, we can kind of see you, but your face is freezing like a really badly done stop motion picture, and your voice sounds like you put a robot through a blender.
So I should try it.
You're on a delay.
Your office Wi-Fi is awful.
Haley, you're on a delay.
Okay, now everything's cutting off.
The joys of technology.
What? I can hear like every couple words, so it's kind of a little bit of a myth.
She probably just heard the word pornography.
Oh man.
Maybe she should try calling with a regular phone.
Yeah, Haley, just call the line.
Yeah, it's technology.
You really do sound like a robot in a blender, and that's not an image I ever wanted to have in my mind.
And just remember, technology is supposed to make things more accessible, not more confusing.
Yeah, she's just gonna call in. So yeah, the first question, I'll just repeat it. What advice would you give a current law student who is unsure about disclosing to their school or potential employer? And I think Ms. Mixon was gonna answer.
I did. So disclosure is a personal preference. Everybody has their thoughts on it. Everybody knows what they need for their own personal disabilities. AJ asked me to speak because I've taken the position that I did not want to tell my employer. And the Florida Bar does not necessarily know. I don't join different organizations because there is a serious stigma that comes with that, especially whenever you're trying cases. It makes a huge difference.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It's okay. That's
So,
the
so, no,
question.
no more crazy robots, right?
Yeah, Haley, just introduce yourself for a quick second.
Okay, quick introduction. Hi, everybody. I am in Miami, Florida. Sorry that I can't join in DC, but we do have pretty great weather where it's still 80 degrees, and I wear flip-flops to get into work because I don't like wearing heels in the morning. I am a first-year associate at Zumpano Patricius here in sunny Coral Gables. My area of practice right now is in managed care, so basically representing hospitals against insurance companies type stuff, and also anti-terrorism. So my firm famously got to fight the drug cartels and actually collect against them, and it's very exciting as a first-year lawyer. I've also been involved in autism and stuff for several years now. I first spoke at a conference when I was 13, and ever since it's just been a very fun ride. I've written 2 books, love to do art, love to get to connect with law students and everyone, and hopefully something I say is able to help.
Cool, thanks Haley. We'll let Savannah finish now.
Still talking. So now I've lost my train of thought twice. And I'm very good the first time. I got this. We're all right. But again, that is up to your personal decision as to whether or not you would like to disclose. One of my partners does know. We worked closely on a really, really big trial, and it had a serious effect on my mental wellness during that time. So I've let one of them know. But I never used it in law school, and I probably could have. So if you need it, if you need to tell people, there are always faculty advisors who will listen to you, who will make what you need happen. And certainly organizations like this, I imagine that AJ would make the push if anything needed to happen in order to make sure that you were accommodated for whatever disability you needed accommodation for. But I think that that's the end of that answer. It was probably more eloquent the first time.
Yeah. So just before we let anyone else answer, Andra is in the room. She is DSS support, and Dr. Floyd Alexander is in the room, and she does just everything. So those are 2 people that you can contact, and Megan, who sits at the front desk, the reception desk at Dean of Students, can point you in the right direction for anyone who needs accommodations or has questions about it. Those will be your points of contact. Also, if you're not getting your accommodations or you feel like the law school isn't accessible, let me know, and I will go in there and talk to someone because I'm in there every day. Just a quick story. We actually had some accessibility issues getting Amy down from the top of the room because she came in through the front, and it was this huge maze. And it just shows you what accessibility is like. So we'll move on to whoever else wants to respond to that question. We can move to the next question.
So I think, like Savannah, I've had some similar experiences, except that I'm very publicly out about being disabled. So like Savannah, my disabilities are largely what are considered hidden disabilities, as may be the case for many of you in the room, by definition. You don't necessarily know by looking at someone or hearing them speak if they are disabled or not. And for people who are very familiar with my types of disabilities, if you spend enough time around me, you'll probably notice eventually, sooner rather than later. But if you're not very familiar with my types of disabilities, and let's be honest, most people in the world generally aren't necessarily very informed. It's not a bad thing. It's not a moral failing. We just all don't know everything in the world. We have limited knowledge and limited experience as human beings. And so if you don't find yourself familiar with my particular types of disabilities, and like everyone else in this entire society, you grew up in an intensely ableist society with ideas about what disability is supposed to mean, how it manifests in a person's life, and what that dictates in terms of how we should respond politically, socially, or culturally to the fact of that person being disabled, you might not know. So my disabilities are developmental, learning, and psychiatric. I'm autistic, and I also have a few different psychosocial disabilities and some cognitive and learning disabilities. And that combination of neurodivergence and very fun things happening inside my brain, my partner and I like to joke that between the two of us, we make up most of the DSM, which is fun. Right, and if we add like all of us here, we might actually manage to make up the entire DSM, or at least very close to it, if we put enough of us in one room. And what that means is that I'm constantly dealing with the question of, will employers know or not? And my resume, unlike Savannah's, makes it very obvious that I'm very deeply connected to and involved with disability advocacy. And if I removed everything from my resume that had to do with disability advocacy, so for the people that are academics in the room, I have a curriculum vitae because I've done teaching work as well. My CV is 27 pages long. If I deleted everything related to disability off of my CV, I think I would have about 3/4 of a page left. And that also would mean I would have to explain some very suspicious looking gaps to the length of years. So were you working? Yes. Well, why isn't it here? I'd rather not say. So what were you doing? Things and stuff. And that's not really a very good interview answer, as I'm sure we can all speculate exactly how that would go over in an interview. Because now I actually look like I'm hiding up my mafia activities. That's what I sound like. And so for me, it's less been a question of, should I disclose, in that in some ways it's already disclosed for me, but at what point do I decide to take control of the conversation? And sometimes that's gone well, because when I'm working with organizations comprised of people that are actually attempting to be understanding and maybe disabled themselves, it might be easier. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's been disability organizations that are actually more ableist and discriminatory than non-disability organizations. And at other times, it's gone really badly, where I regretted saying something. So one example of that was when I was in clinic in 3L year. After the first clinic class meeting, the professor, who, interestingly, tangent, I later found out is the only member of my law school's faculty who never went to law school. But only, mediocre white men could get away with doing that. Anyway, he was our clinic professor. He was partnered with an actual attorney who was outside the law school. He had mentioned in clinic class that it was very important that we make sure to be on time and present for the entirety of every single clinic class, because this could bear on our effective representation of our clients. And that made sense to me. And I knew that because of my learning disabilities and some post-traumatic stress trauma effects, that it's very hard for me to be on time to things, as evidenced by the fact that I wasn't on time today. I tried really hard. I failed. I had to take very drastic measures to be on time for the bar exam, let's just say. Drastic measures. Because I was late to every one of my final exams in law school. And those are kind of important. So I knew that I would have a hard time being on time to clinic, no matter how hard I tried. And I knew that there would be at least a couple of sessions, not the entirety of the term, but a couple of sessions that I wouldn't be able to attend. And of course, I wouldn't want to put myself in a situation where I might be giving less than ethical representation to a client, even with supervision. So I made the decision to speak to the clinic professor after the very first day of class, when I still would have been able to withdraw from clinic, to disclose, I have these disabilities, they affect me in this way. I will do my best to try to be on time, or as close to it as possible, and my best to not miss class sessions, but I already know in advance I likely will. If you believe, in your experience as the professor for this clinic, that means I should not be in this clinic because it would so detrimentally affect my ability to represent a client, then please let me know now so that I can withdraw from clinic, because I don't want to do that, because that's unfair to a client. And what he told me was, oh no, you'll be fine. Famous last words, because the entire rest of the term was filled with enough discriminatory actions toward me that I would have been well within my rights to file an equal employment complaint. And it was very clear by the nature of various actions that the clinic professor took, as well as comments that were made to me both in writing and verbally, that all of these discriminatory behaviors were being done on the basis of my disclosure of disability. And it affected my mental health so badly, ironically, disclosing in an attempt to try to mitigate the effects of this, ended up being so detrimental to my mental health that I ended up taking incompletes in 100% of my courses that term, which then led to failing to turn in the work at the end of the incompletes, barely managing to scrape it together, receiving the equivalent of 2 Ds, and being told that I was on academic probation and could be expelled in the spring of my 3L. Spoiler alert, I didn't get expelled because I'm here and I have a law license, but that's the bad way that disclosure can go. So to the Savannah's answer, like, it's a very personal decision. It is, because there's ways in which if you're lucky and the dice roll comes out to a natural 20, maybe it's going to go great for you and result in a very affirming and supportive work environment. But on the other hand, if you crit fail like I did, it could very badly affect not just your mental health, but your ability to perform, and therefore future career opportunities down the road, because I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried about how my written evaluation from that clinic was going to affect me with future applications.
Oh, no, I agree. Even in coming out to some of my bosses at work, we all have stress. Every practicing attorney will tell you that our lives are built around stress, and we're a little bit like drug addicts, that we want that. We kind of itch for it.
We want the adrenaline.
We do. We want the adrenaline. We want that rush. But the difference is, where some people enjoy the rush and it gives them a high, it is crippling for me. I need to be in my office. I need things written down on paper. I need to understand what is happening so I have control over a situation. And litigation, my friends, is not a place that you have control over anything. So it's all fake. But when you tell someone, you expect them not to say, oh, we're all a little obsessive. Oh, we're all anxious. Yes, we are. Mine's different. I will have to lay in my bed for 5 days to overcome what you just did to me because it became something that was a joke. It's not a joke. So disclosure is just personal. And there are going to be times that it goes so incredibly well and you feel empowered and you feel connected to someone who now understands a part of you that I have hidden from many, many people in my life. On the flip side, I have also told people, and they'll be like, yeah, no problem, it's fine. And then it becomes a running joke. Oh, she's the crazy one. Don't give her anything too much. It'll overwhelm her. It can go either way. And I think we're lucky in that our disabilities are hidden. This is probably a completely different story for others of us in the room, where you walk in and people automatically make assumptions. I got lucky.
No choice.
Mm-hmm.
Just to
I also have similar experiences to both Savannah and Lydia, especially with Lydia, that I too am open by virtue of the work that I've done. I mean, one Google search kind of gives it away. So if I don't disclose or don't put that stuff on my resume, I get the same questions of what's going on here. But at the same time, I think disclosure needs to be on your terms. It is a very personal decision. For me, it's usually a very automatic thing. And I think even if I say it early on in an interview or the like, it also kind of starts to weed out the people who you know will not accommodate or not be understanding. I feel it goes that way in social situations too. So I personally feel comfortable erring on the side of disclosure, especially because then I can also work with a potential employer or somebody else of how to do a good job and how to make this work for everybody involved. But at the same time, I do also have experience where disclosure did not go well, or someone will automatically assume I'm less competent or some other form of discrimination that might not be as apparent.
Sure. So it is a little bit different, obviously, when it's very visible, and so you don't really have the option of whether to disclose or not. Sometimes I have to admit I kind of do wish that I had that option, but I also can say that I've had a positive experience in letting my employer know about the situation. I was actually born with cerebral palsy, so it's something that I've dealt with my entire life, and I think that makes it, that brings it from a different perspective. But one thing that you should know, that maybe you already do know, if you do need accommodations on the job, which there were some things that I needed accommodations for, you have to disclose. So you don't necessarily have to disclose your entire medical history or all the details about everything, but you need to disclose what your functional limitations are and how they relate to the job. So if you're in that situation, then it really doesn't become a choice, because in order to get that, you do legally have to provide that information. Another interesting thing about my situation, though, is about 3 months into the job, and I already used a wheelchair and everything, but I was crossing the street in my wheelchair here in DC, and I got hit by a car. So then I had some other injuries, which I was, luckily was able to recover from, but the impacts were lasting, and it did change what my functional ability was. So then I had to sit down with my employer again, and we had to sort of have a conversation about, okay, well, here's the new situation. How can we address that? And I think it did help that I was in a organization that was already sensitive to disability issues. It kind of freaked me out that everything kind of changed 3 months into the job. So, I'm lucky that it worked out well, but it's not something, again, that I normally spend a lot of time talking about the details of my medical history until you get to know someone really well. I've been there 9 years now, so my supervisor does know quite a bit about a lot of stuff that he didn't necessarily know at the beginning, but that's, again, because I chose to share that information once I got to know him better. So,
I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's incredibly personal choice. It's based on the circumstances. Each person kind of has to figure out what's best for them. But for me, when I was doing on-campus interviewing 8 years ago, and when I would wheel into every interview, I obviously didn't have the choice to disclose or not. My resume had some disability on it, but not a lot. I think probably the most that made it clear that I had a disability was I put that I was in the Paralympics on there, because that was cool, and it's like an extracurricular. I was a swimmer in college, and some interactions were great. People asked questions about Paralympics, about my disability history, not like medical history, but like experiences in terms of work experiences, which was all great. And then some, were bad experiences where people would ask, "Oh, your hands are affected. Can you type?" Well, they're definitely not allowed to ask that question. Presumably, I'm at a smart school. I'm doing very well. Like I can handle the job. So it's just really it depends. It's a personal experience. The person who hired me, well, not who hired me, but the person who interviewed me on my on-campus interview at Sidley, he himself had a disability, and I honestly think that it was a point of connection for the two of us, and actually helped me, get my foot in the door. So I think in some ways it can definitely be a positive thing, and you don't have to just be nervous about it, but again, it just totally depends on the situation and the person.
So as a follow-up question, I think all of our panelists mentioned accommodations in some way. What do you think is the best way to request accommodation from an employer, or to fill out whether or not you can get accommodations? So I'll leave that up to whoever wants to answer.
I can do it quickly. At Sidley, at least, it's through the HR department, so it's completely separate from any of my supervisors, any of my bosses, any of recruiting, anyone who's making decisions about my growth or promotion opportunities. So that's quite nice. HR deals with it. They, of course, may need to contact other people if needed, but it is kind of separate. And I think that's true for probably a lot of large firms.
Yeah, my firm is very segmented. Our pre-litigation division and our first property division, and all of them are on different floors, so I was much more comfortable going to my own personal boss to bring my service dog into the office, especially for depositions or any sort of mediation or anything like that. That was why I had to tell. But certainly you could go to HR. I think, again, it's going to be personal preference, like it always is. Whoever you feel closest to, whoever you identify with and can open up and have that conversation with. It's a conversation that can be uncomfortable. Yes, I am competent. Yes, I will be here on time. Yes, I will do X, Y, and Z. But P.S., sometimes I need to bring my dog. And it's not because he's cute. It's not because I want to cuddle him. And then you have to go into exactly what you mentioned, exactly how this dog is going to help me in this situation, and why is that related to my job.
And our organization is only 30 individuals, so I think it's a lot smaller than the law firms that they're talking about. So we don't actually have a separate HR department. So in my situation, it was talking to my supervisor directly, but we do put everything in writing. There's a form that's filled out, and reevaluated at whatever time frame we established to make sure that everything is still working. Again, I think it helped a lot in my particular situation that I was already in an environment that was kind of sensitive to those issues.
This is Lydia, kind of similar to Amy because I work for a disability rights advocacy organization, and specifically one that does work on mental health and developmental disabilities. I felt like it was certainly a more open environment to talk about access needs that I would have than I might have at another employer. But also, like Amy's, it's a very small organization. I am one of 9 attorneys currently there. There's literally 9 of us. And if you include non-attorney staff, there are 12 total humans in our office. So there isn't necessarily one person whose job it is to do HR. Like at Sidley Austin, there's a whole HR department. We don't really have that. And so when I needed to request assistance or accommodations, I just talked to my direct supervisor. But I also recognize it's not a privilege that everyone has for a lot of reasons, and it's not one that I had in other positions that I've had, where I didn't feel comfortable talking to that person. But I think, to the question of what is the best way, it would depend on your situation. It's not just that it's a personal decision, it's a strategic one. If you think that your employer is going to be hostile toward it, then the way that you go about asking for accommodations probably shouldn't be the same as if you know that your employer will be extremely supportive and affirming of you. It doesn't make sense to try to take a potential pre-litigious approach to the very supportive employer, because then they're like, why are you acting like you're documenting every single email and phone call? And I'm like, you don't need to do that. And at the same time, if you're worried it's not going to go over well, even if you don't know that they're going to be outright hostile, it might make sense to keep track of that information, even if you never end up litigating it, just so that you have a record, if only for your own personal, private purposes, to know this is what I tried to do. If it's just a record to help you make a decision that it's time to move on and look for another job, because it's just not a place that's welcoming and supportive of you, and you can't function there. And that's going to be very personal where you're at. But you're all law students now currently. There's just a few faculty in the room. How many people here are current law students? Okay, that's most people. Of y'all that are current law students, how many of you are 3Ls? Just the one lonely 3L. I'm so sorry. My condolences. Sorry about your summer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't really say anything else. Let me know later if you want bar tips. I just survived that experience. But for the rest of y'all who are not 3Ls, it's something that you're going to have to think about with your internships, with clinic, with any externships you do, and when you eventually are looking at joining the work world, aka the world of torture and pain in the service of capitalism. Enjoy. But yeah, it's going to have to be a very strategic decision, and I don't think that any of us can tell you this is the one path you have to take, just because your work environment and your practice area is going to be very particular to what you end up doing.
Cool. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit with the next question. And obviously, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But do you think the ABA does a good job of providing firms with guidance on how to maintain compliance with the ADA? And do you think most firms that you've interacted with do comply with the ADA fully?
Well, Austin.
That's a great question. I think that the ABA is a great resource. Full disclosure, I was on their Disability Coalition, I can't remember the name of it, but when I was a first year at Sidley, the most recent Knowleswood president always gets to be on their committee. So I do have some experience with the ABA. I think, though, a lot of large law firms are such large institutions that have been around for so long and haven't really had a chance to think about disability inclusion. And so I think in some ways they're trying to catch up. I think, though, it's not specific to disability. I think it's gender, race. I think there's a lot of issues that law firms are trying to tackle. Mental health. I mean, I don't know if people saw, but one of the partners in our LA office committed suicide last year, or earlier this year. It was in all the legal newspapers. And so now Sidley's really focused on mental health and wellness and really trying to just get up to speed on a lot of these issues. And the ABA has been a partner in that. They have a new mental health awareness pledge that they're having law firms sign. So I think it is kind of getting better, but I think, just as there is with other types of diversity issues, there's progress to be made. I think I'm actually quite proud of the fact that since I started Sibley, I think disability has become much more of a focus within the diversity umbrella, just because I've made it a visible topic and an issue that needed to be part of the conversation. And we now have a Disability Alliance committee that meets quarterly. So I think yes and no is my answer, I guess.
I'll echo the yes and no. So in the state of Florida, the American Bar Association gives advice and can give guidance, but has no teeth. The Florida Bar is really who would be telling our firms what to do. And
That's true everywhere.
Exactly. And that, you hit the nail on the head, though. It's not just disability. It's we are working in an old, very established profession that has been working a very certain way for a very, very long time. And making people change that model is somehow uncomfortable. I'm not necessarily sure why it's uncomfortable, but it is. And that goes all the way through. It goes all the way through from working at home to women not having to wear pantyhose in the courtroom to making it wheelchair accessible to get into a mock courtroom. All of these things are somehow difficult. So I'm sure the guidance exists. Whether or not they take it is a case-by-case basis.
And could even be office-by-office basis.
Or even floor-by-floor in your office.
Definitely state by state or office by office. I think even going off of what Savannah said, I know Florida is trying to do a better job in general, especially with all their new mental health initiatives. I'm hoping to see a little bit more change, especially because I do think our profession isn't very friendly at all towards anyone who does have a disability. So I am a little bit excited to see what happens next. And I know Florida is getting new leadership that seems to really care a lot about health and wellness and mental health. So I'm hoping to see change and hoping that the ABA also seems to follow suit.
This is Lydia. I will add what you were talking about. It's the ABA's Commission on Disability Rights. It has 2 staff. At one point, it had 5 staff. They currently have 2 staff. They're a director and a program specialist. I can't think of his actual title. And now I feel bad because he's my friend and I talk to him a lot. But anyway, there's 2 staff at the ABA Commission on Disability Rights, and their job is to do not just, promote disabled people within the profession, promote disability rights as a topic of importance within the ABA's diversity commissions in general. There's a whole bunch of diversity commissions at the ABA, but also give guidance like to state bar associations, to firms, to law schools. And that's a lot for 2 humans to be doing. I think those 2 humans are trying to do an enormous amount of work that they need a much larger staff to accomplish fully and effectively, and they're doing the best they possibly can, and it's limited. It's not because they're bad people or doing a bad job or that CDR isn't great. Like we've all talked about some of how they are doing some things that are important, but they have 2 staff. You all might not know that. Now you do. You might not have known that before. So there's 2 staff. There's just 2 staff for the entire ABA Commission on Disability Rights. Then there are commission members, but commission members only meet a few times a year, and their job is to say, okay, here's our statements and our policy things that we would like for the commission to do. So there's a whole commission that gives assignments to the 2 staff, who then have the rest of the year to work on all of those initiatives. And there's 2 of them. I don't think I've emphasized this enough. There's 2 of them, and their experiences are limited because I've met both of them. I know both of them. I have respect enormously for the work that they're doing, but it's limited not just because of staff capacity, but both of the staff that work for CDR are white people. And so for me as a person of color who's also disabled, it means that I'm thinking, wait, how can the ABA's Commission on Disability Rights become more effective in giving guidance and assisting programs or firms or whoever in actually supporting disabled people when the 2 people who are staffing it, as amazing as their work might be and what they're doing, also have their own limited experiences and their own limited perspectives from where they come from, and they lack a broader staff. They don't have more staff. They used to have more positions at CDR, and they don't now. And so I don't know how that happened. I don't know if they'll ever have more staff in the future, but that's an ABA systemic problem in that firstly, there's only 2. And secondly, their staff needs to not just expand in numbers, but also expand in diversity within the Commission on Disability Rights in order to be able to provide more effective guidance that hopefully won't be just completely ignored. Although we all know that there are certain actors who would nod, smile, and then promptly forget that the interaction even occurred. We've all had that happen. Probably too many times to count.
Cool. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can kind of open it up if people have questions that they want to ask themselves. This one is kind of a personal question, so I would love to hear your responses. What are some ideas for students who are working to improve accessibility and overall education about neurodiversity and disability in law schools and law firms?
I think even just being able to organize and connect with other law students. So even you having the Atypical Student Society is a huge step forward. tried to do something like that my first year of law school. And I remember signing up super enthusiastically, and nothing ever came of it. And they never met. And I just remember feeling incredibly isolated as a person who is neurodiverse on campus. And it wasn't until my 3L year that another student told me they were autistic, and I was like, really? I'm not the only one here. And I found it very interesting that there was no organization. So I think even being able to mobilize as law students, and that's something that law students do very well. I was in a public interest fellowship program when I was in law school, and my colleagues would rally around all sorts of different causes and were very, very active politically and socially. Yet disability never seemed to be part of their equation. So I do think that even having associations where we are able to gather and meet and befriend and work with one another is a huge step forward in law schools.
And I will play off of that. It comes down to personal connection. So if you're going to share the things that you need, if you're going to share the struggles that you're going through, it comes down to how you're communicating that to people, especially when you're advocating on behalf of yourself to an employer who, in Florida, it's a right to work state. They don't have to hire you, and they can fire you as soon as they find out. I've often found that the framework of that conversation needs to be picked very correctly to play off of yours. It doesn't need to be hostile. It doesn't necessarily need to be very friendly. It can be somewhere in between where you're just educating people. I'm a normal person. These are my own personal struggles. This is what I need from you. And if you can give this to me, you will be shocked at the type of employee that I can be. And if you say that, you have to live up to that part of it. It's really about communication.
I guess I think what Haley said. I think organizing, meeting with other people in the disability community. I don't think I've told my story, but I was in a car accident when I was 14. I have a spinal cord injury, and so I had no experience. My family and I had no experience with disability before that, and since then I've really loved being a part of the disability community and been very active. And I think that has been really beneficial just to learn from each other. I'm a big advocate for cross-disability organizations. I don't think, you have to be specific to your own disability. I think kind of having the broader umbrella and connecting and figuring out how you can help each other is great. In my law school, we did have a disability student organization. That was fantastic, and we would sometimes partner with the other diverse organizations to have larger events and just educate the student body more generally, and I really enjoyed doing that.
And I think kind of everybody's already said this, but awareness is really the key. Just being involved in things and helping people to become aware of different circumstances or different situations, because a lot of times it's not, in my opinion, that people are trying to be difficult or discriminatory. It's just that they're not aware of the situation, and once they're aware of it, then their perspective changes pretty dramatically. And that's not an across-the-board situation, because that depends a lot, again, on individual circumstances. But I have found that just making people aware of what some situations may be or what some limitations may be can really cause a change in their attitude as well.
And this is Lydia. I would say that one thing that's really important to do is to follow the lead of and be connected with local organizing efforts, because it's really easy when you're in academia and especially law school not to do that. But if you don't, then you don't know what's happening on the ground, and you don't know what you can be doing with the access to resources or tools that you have to support efforts being done on the ground. And you have some opportunities to do that. You're right here in DC. There's a lot of organizing happening here. A lot of people that are my friends and colleagues are doing work on disability justice, which is a deliberately intersectional framework that centers disabled people of color and queer and trans disabled people of color. And you had the opportunity to connect with people in many different spaces. This Friday, April 5th at University of Maryland College Park, there's an annual Disability Community Summit that brings together people from this community and some people from outside of the area to learn from each other on disability activism and advocacy issues. And that's free and open to the public. And if you don't have classes, you should go. That's this Friday. You can get to it on the Metro, allegedly. I've made that trip before because that's where I kept taking the LSAT when I was taking the LSAT. And okay, to be fair, I had to be there at 8 a.m. those days. That was awful. But you can get there less awfully, and it's worth going. Next week on April 10th, there's a symposium at American University on disability access and teaching, and a number of student activists will be part of that symposium, and that's also free and open to the public. That's next week on Wednesday. You can be present. Next week, there's also there's a national organization that brings together a disability policy seminar, and while that organization is focused on policy advocacy and is one of the many overwhelmingly white disability organizations, a lot of grassroots organizers will be coming into town for that conference. And they're hosting, I think they're hosting a couple of different receptions and get-togethers. And if you are interested in doing the work and connecting with people that are at the front lines, there are so many opportunities that are just in the next 7 days for you to be able to do that, let alone for the rest of your time that you're in law school here and for your future. I co-coordinated and helped found a group based in DC called the Washington Metro Disabled Students Collective, which is still semi-active-ish, and it's a pan-DC wide area, pan-disability group that is focused on peer education for political consciousness and advocacy and organizing. If you happen to be disabled or have a disability, you're welcome to get involved with that. And there's just a wealth of opportunities to connect with people that are doing on-the-ground work that is not going to be featured in law school magazines and is probably not going to be featured in the Washington Post, but is happening right here in your backyard, bringing people who've already lived here and been here their entire lives, and being led by people who are from this community, and work that is bringing in people from other communities to learn from and connect with each other that are outside the professional sphere. And yet there are still people who will insist on stopping and saying, "So it's really nice to meet you. What do you do?"
Just to
I have
add,
a pet peeve against this question.
Just to add to Lydia's answer, there's also going to be an event at George Mason on Thursday, focusing on disability advocacy. If you would like information on those events, just let me know. I can add you to the ATIPS listserv. All we do is send out emails about events and job opportunities. So it's kind of annoying, but if you want a job or something like that, you can get it. And yeah, just let me know. I can add you on the listserv and you can get the emails about all the events. And we'll open the floor up. We were scheduled to have it till 1, but if you want to stay, you can. Hi, Dana. If not, go to class, whatever you have to do. The panelists can leave if they want. But if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and ask.
So I'm Evan. I'm a 1L. Hi, Lydia. See you again.
Why did you go to law school?
Why?
Why do you hate yourself?
I ask myself that question every day. And I also ask myself the question.
It is a genuinely good question, though.
Yeah, for real. I also ask myself the question every day about visibility. So this is a small school. I am widely recognized, or maybe that's my ego talking, as, you know, I'm that guy with the crutches, and he walks around and he seems nice. And I think that can have a tendency to make you think, oh, I am the law student with a disability, will become the lawyer with a disability, instead of just being a lawyer. So I'm curious what you all think about that, and kind of ways in which you can break out of that paradigm, because it's pretty limiting, and it can be frustrating.
So this is Lydia. I do want to respond to that because I've had this struggle for a while. Like, you knew me at Georgetown. That's how we know each other. And you probably knew that my reputation was the disabled activist. That was my reputation at Georgetown.
I wouldn't have just said activist, but
and,
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a wrong reputation. Like, that's not inaccurate of a description, nor is it something that I'm ashamed of. And at the same time, as someone where the vast majority of my work, paid and unpaid, is related to advocacy and activism, like, it is a very frustrating trend in my life that all the time people, for example, let's just use this as an example, on my personal Facebook page, I can post a Facebook status that says something like, as has happened recently, there are cockroaches in my office and I am afraid. This has nothing whatsoever to do with my disability. But half the comments will say, well, you know, I'm also autistic, and I found that one thing that helps me is, and, you know, I'm thinking, what does this have to do with autism? Like, I don't think the person who made that comment was trying to be discriminatory in any way. They certainly weren't being hostile. They were trying to show solidarity, like, I'm also autistic, this worked for me. And I'm thinking, but this question isn't about autism. And that's just one microcosm of a phenomenon that in any space I am, people often conflate me either with autism specifically or disability in general, as though that's the only thing relevant to know about me or my life, and that in any sentence describing me, you have to insert disability or autism somewhere. And what's hard with that is that a lot of my work in disability activism is very much about empowerment and pride and cultural connection as a disabled person, and claiming that as something to be proud of and as something that does define me. But at the same time, you're absolutely right, and that I don't want, and I've been frustrated by this for my entire life now, to be known as just, well, you're the one that does disability activism. That's what you do, and that's all you're known for. Because people who know me really well personally know that my number one passion in life is my fiction writing. I'm working on my 7th novel right now. And no, they're not about disability. Are disabled people in my novels? Well, of course, why wouldn't they be? But they're not about disability as a topic. And people don't know that because they think, well, Lydia Brown, you're the disabled advocate, you're the disabled attorney. And I think for me, there isn't a way that I can force other people's opinions to change. I can't change what other people think about who I am and what I do, but I can tell people what is important in my life and what is important to me. And if somebody else wants to define me only by their conceptualization of you fit into the disability box or you fit into the Asian box or the trans box, then they're going to do that no matter what I do or don't do. And it's important for me, for my own sanity, and I mean that quite literally as a person with multiple mental illnesses as well, that I deliberately choose to participate in activities or programs that are not directly related to being a disabled person or to disability activism. And it's not because I want to escape disability or that I think it's not a part of my life. It is obviously a part of my life, but because I need to be in spaces where people don't recognize me.
Right.
And where I can tell people, hey, I'm disabled if I want to, or if there's a reason for it in conversation. I don't hide that. But where the purpose of my being there is not related to advocacy. Does that make sense? So I will be at Georgetown Street Laws event tonight. They're doing a mock trial competition for DC high school students, and I will be volunteering for that event. And it has nothing to do with disability, and it's great. And I haven't read the case materials yet, and I'm supposed to be scoring.
You got this. I also think what you said about existing in spaces outside of disability advocacy is important too. I mean, in law school, my first identifier when I first got there was art, because when I got to law school, someone discovered my art page, and probably the first thing they said to me wasn't about disability whatsoever, but why are you here? You should be painting. And I kind of laughed it off at first, and eventually that kind of became my identifier. And then eventually as time went on, I think my identifier became more about disability. But throughout law school, a lot of my identifier was that I had an art background. So I think even getting to share the other things you're passionate about helps other people see you as more than just disability. But then again, everyone loved seeing when I was writing and when I was drawing. So even when I'd and sometimes I would purposely bring my sketchbook to law school just so people would continue that association rather than just go, okay, all that there is to know about this person is disability. And I do consider art another part of who I am and my identity, much like Lydia considers their fiction writing part of their identity. So I think that's really important too, is to be like, well, there's more to me than just disability or what you may see or what you may hear. So even when I was in law school, I remember we had a professor who had an illness suddenly, and everyone said, can you draw the card for us? And for me, it was exciting because I'm like, okay, they value what I care about, and also it's an opportunity to connect with the rest of the law school. So I remember doing it, and it honestly did help solidify my time there too and have people see me as more. But also I think as I became an attorney, thanks to the news cycle as well, I do think disability really did become a more integral part of my identity as an attorney, and I'm trying to also get away from that a little bit too, because there are also spaces where disability is not as relevant to who I am and what I'm doing there.
And Haley, I actually draw too. We should share drawings sometime.
Yes, we should. I remember seeing your drawings on the anthology, and I was like, you are amazing.
Well, thank you.
Even if you take it out of the disability realm, you will always have an identifier. Every single person here has
100%.
an identifier, whether or not that's you're the young attorney, you're the whatever attorney. It's going to happen.
Right.
As your career progresses and as the people around you get to know you better, your identifiers do change. But to play off of what both of it, there's nothing you can do about it that I know of.
And Liz was starting to say something.
I think, just echoing, I think what's been said, but when I started at Sidley, I was first as a summer associate and then as a first year associate. I think people did recognize me. I'm very recognizable and as the only person in a wheelchair in this huge office. So they recognize me as the first year associate in a wheelchair. But now, as a seventh year, I've been there so long, they know that I am the healthcare coverage and coding expert and that I do 340B, which is this like obscure drug discount pricing program that a lot of our clients care about. And that's kind of now what I'm known for. So it took time. I think, they didn't know me when I started other than the fact that I was in a wheelchair. But now I'm kind of built this reputation of being an expert in other things and, being very involved in the firm. So it's kind of transitioned a bit, but yeah, some of it is inevitable.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Liz said. I had the same experience. You kind of start out that way as that is the chair is your identifying thing, and then you get into the job and you help them to focus on other things. And actually, I really love the employment environment because you're spending a lot more time talking about the clients and talking about whatever brief you are reviewing and not talking about your own personal situation. So that also gets the focus off of it too.
Any more questions? There's one.
We talked a lot about disclosure as well as you mentioned, check boxes in our answer. Is checking essentially choosing not to disclose, signaling that maybe there is something, in an application we're allowed not to disclose, yes, no, or choose not to disclose? Is checking the do not disclose kind of raising any potentially giving indication there's something, but why won't why are they not able to disclose, or what is it? Could that be detrimental?
So you're saying on the application, it's giving you an option that says, do you want to disclose or not? There's a yes or no, because I would have thought that if you weren't going to disclose, then it would just be left blank and they wouldn't know one way or another.
The phrasing of the question is always, do you identify as a person with a disability? Yes, I do. No, I do not. I do not wish to disclose.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're basically saying yes by saying I do not want to disclose.
You absolutely could. So whenever I filled out my application, my answer was no, I do not identify as that because I don't. It's not something that is a central part of my identity until it is. So it was a little shocking whenever I told my boss 6-8 months into my job, hey, P.S., this entire time, we haven't been talking about it. It's a thing. If you don't put an answer on there, you just skip the question. And then you didn't give any indication one way or another.
I mean, legally, that portion of your application is supposed to be kept separate from the rest of your application because it's equal employment opportunity questions. That, of course, doesn't mean that every employer actually follows the law. So just because it's a legal requirement doesn't mean you can trust every employer to do it. But if they are following the law, whatever your answer is on that part of the application, those are equal employment opportunity questions. If they're following the law, that's supposed to be filed separate from your name. And it's supposed to be so that they keep track of what people from what protected groups are applying for jobs here. Have we ever hired anyone from various protected groups? Do we reject all applicants who checked Hispanic? Do we reject all applicants who disclosed LGBTQ? Do we hire black men but never hire black women? It's supposed to be for that type of purpose. But of course, someone might not follow the law. I do think that practically speaking, someone checking I don't want to disclose is basically outing themselves as a disabled person. So I don't know why that answer is there. I think that the question is phrased and with the answers, because that is the standard setup of it, it's just badly designed as a question. Because it should be, do you want to disclose having a disability, yes or no? So where a no answer could mean either I have one, but I don't want to disclose it to you, or I don't have one, but it's ambiguous. And that would actually protect people's answers better than the way the question's actually designed. But I don't design these forms, and no one cares what I think.
No one asked us.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, I had a question specifically for Ms. Moss. Can you hear me?
Haley.
Yeah?
So you mentioned earlier that new leadership in Florida was putting more of an emphasis on the issues that we were talking about today. Who were you referring to specifically?
Florida Bar Association.
I know with what's going on with the mental health and wellness in Florida is the Young Lawyers Division is taking on the stigma-free YLD, so they're sharing stories about mental health and things of that nature. I also know that our current president-elect designate, who is going to become the president of the Florida Bar, I believe, for the 2020 term, she's the one who's been spearheading the committees on mental health and wellness for the Florida Bar, and it's been her pet project. I also know her fairly well because I was introduced to her at a function, and also I connected with her daughter, oddly enough, on Twitter because her daughter is also autistic and about most of our age, at least she's my age. I'm 24 right now. So it was really cool getting to connect and also learning more about what the bar is doing to make this happen. So the Mental Health and Wellness Committee is really committed to trying to do better, at least for Florida lawyers. The Florida Board of Bar Examiners is finally changing their approach to how they approach bar applicants' mental health. So they've been making it so now if you've ever sought counseling for stress, anxiety, or any of that, or grief or any of that during law school, you don't have to say anything. And there's also been a settlement that if you do need some kind of psychiatric assessment, this came out maybe a week ago, that the Florida Bar, or at least the Florida Board of Bar Examiners, will pay up to $3,000 of that cost instead of just making it out of pocket for applicants. So the Florida Bar is taking a couple steps, I've noticed, but I'm hoping to see what they will do as far as actual disabled attorneys, neurodiversity, and things of that nature too. I'm hoping that's going to change. It's something that I would like to see, but only time will tell.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we want to be mindful of everyone's time. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you for coming. And if you haven't signed in, please sign in. It's so important. Like, I know it sounds like really important. And get more food and water, and then
Food too, right? Because
Yeah.
I come for food.
Yeah, for sure. I was not as prepared as I should have been, which is the story of my life. Food's up there. There are vegetarian options unless they've all been taken. Thank you, everyone. Haley, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
So glad that we
finally mail these now late.
Miss Bobby normally has Scotch tape, but Miss Bobby's been under the weather all week, so I don't know what to do.
I'm telling you, I ask myself that every day. All right, it's because I was stuck in a very shitty job. I was stuck working at a tech company here that does stuff for Democratic candidates. It was really shitty. It was called NGP Van. I really didn't like it. But I was stuck there because I needed a job. And so I did that for a few years, and then I realized I need to do something more graphic. And then it became a conversation about, I think it was because it was a middle ground between, okay, if I do a year-long master's program, I'm going to come out of here in exactly the same situation I'm in now, looking for a job, just with debt. And then there was always the following my parents' path option and becoming their academics, so getting PhDs. But PhDs are not, in history especially, are a long time and not as valuable as they were in 1984 when my parents were started.
They can be, but it's hard.
It is. So that's where I'm kind of. So I started.
What do you want to say though?
So I'm looking into disability stuff primarily. I have a job this summer with a group called Quality Trust.
Which one? Oh, I know Quality Trust
Yeah.
very well. They all know me. You can tell them
Cool.
I said
I will. I'm looking forward to it.
hi. You know that everyone knows me.
Oh, well, yeah. You're Lydia. Like, come on.
That sounded so egotistical. That's not how
No. I mean, like, as soon as I saw you were on this panel, I'm like, oh, I gotta come down and say hi to Lydia. Wow. I was gonna come
Because you
anyway.
live here. Where do you live?
I live in Arlington right now. But we're
I
gonna
was
be
living in Arlington. I'm in Montgomery County now.
Yeah. Do you think it's a better experience in Arlington?
Well, I had roaches in the building in Arlington. I don't have
So,
roaches
okay,
now.
that's good. That's good. High five.
I no longer have roaches. It's great.
That's really the bare minimum.
Right? The standards for a decent place to live.
Exactly.
Just now.
Very important.
Where are you moving to?
So I'm hoping to move to somewhere around here.
In DC?
In Foggy specifically because of the, I
You're
know.
not gonna find somewhere.
It's going to be closer to here, and my girlfriend works in Georgetown, so
I would tell you, here's my advice, look at Glover Park.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to find the closest to affordable.
And you
Glover
can-
Park is just north of Georgetown.
and you can still get here on like a bus, right?
Yes, you can take a bus from Glover Park.
All right.
So the two places that you should look are Petworth, which is directly
Right.
here,
Right.
and Glover Park, which is just north of Georgetown.
Okay. I will keep that in mind. We're starting to really.
Because you're going to look together, look for Glover Park. That's what you want to do. That's your ideal. Glover Park.
Good.
That's where you're going to find somewhere to live.
And it's like still a pretty nice place.
Don't share it around with everyone, or else it will not be an easy place to find somewhere.
That
to
is
live.
fair. That is fair.
I'm telling you because you're my friend.
I get that.
I live far outside DC.
Yeah.
But I'm here every day usually because I work here.
Right.
So we should get together.
We should.
Do you still have my information?
I think I do. I can double check.
Because then you should reach out and set the time.
Yeah. Give me your. What's your number?
202 618 0187.
And my
Cool.
That's kind of like
I'll text you.
if you're used to it, my mind.
I don't have your number.
You don't have my number?
I imagine I'm probably building exposure to more school, but I'm not.
Okay, cool. Someone will probably email you.
Thank
As
you.
long as you got paid.
You're welcome. That would be great. Okay. Great.
Yeah,
Old number.
we can do that.
Do you have a 781? That number still goes to me, but I use the 202.
202.
Yeah, I use the 202, the one that I actually use.
Hi, I'm Keziah.
Lydia.
Nice to meet you.
Have you emailed me before?
Yeah.
KEZIA.
That is it.
You love law school?
I've gotten a couple emails from somebody else.
If not, then there's someone with my name, which is cool.
Let me see.
High school last name.
Keziah Ewurajua.
Not me.
Oh, different.
Different Keziah, though. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting, though.
Very similar. Very, very similar.
Wait, where did it? Amy and Liz go. Wait, you're leaving. You are leaving without saying goodbye to me. Bye, Liz.
Yes, of course I did.
Wait, hold on.
No way. You're right. That's what I literally know how.
That's actually bye, Liz.
What that means is that she's the good at
Thank you so much.
Of course. Good. Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. As someone
I
who
was like, she's running away. I actually practice with a quadriplegic who struggles kind of with the same thing. I will tell you that when we roll him in front of a jury, every time he's that good, and you get distracted, of course, at first because he rolls in. But as soon as he starts talking, you don't see it.
you gotta play the hand yourself.
You do. I need to get. You do.
If jurors are.
Yeah,
I come from Houston and I need speech tape.
but I had the exact same experience. It might happen when I was younger. I was like, everything
I am notoriously, yeah.
What?
So one birthday was Sunday and the other birthday was last week.
Well, that.
This is like, sorry, your birthday card is going to be like, hey, yes.
Well, good luck with the bar.
Bye, Evan.
Wait, what happened?
Bye, Evan. Thank you for coming.
Alright.
What's up?
I left my.
AJ, is this all the food up here?
Yeah.
So there's only one food thing left.
Oh, well, I guess people are hungry. Is mine still over there? Or did someone eat it?
Yeah, and then there's just that.
Is my food still there?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Taking this kimchi though.
No, you're not. I got that special made. Yeah, I get the plug at Rolling Cow because I advertise them. Trash can's right around the corner.
He spent an extra 40 minutes in traffic this morning. Like, I looked down at my phone.
Publicly speaking.
Oh yeah, that's a 25-minute delay. Construction. There's no construction anywhere.
Thanks for coming.
I signed in.
I appreciate it.
I know how the sign is.
We're gonna have it. It's gonna happen. Bring it in. Bring it in. Thanks for having me. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much for coming.
Kiss the dogs.
Yeah. I will know Tuesday night. Wednesday morning.
It's all good. Like I said, not bothering me.
Just saying. And then important. You have to go to work.
Yeah, later.
So you're good to the airport.
I'll see you.
Thank you both. You're gonna take Uber to Pizza Hut.
How much you want to drive? You want to drive?
Just take the train. It's $7. I'll pay for the train.
I mean, so my internship's not an issue to pay me. That's not the problem. Is the train going to be easier? Run my brain.
I just figured it out.
Yeah. I'll make the train.
I have prosopagnosia. Yeah. We can talk about it.
It's $7. Have you explained this?
Yes, he tried to, but he also told me that he had to wait at the train station like an hour
Yeah,
one time.
you have to like line up your flight and the train like.
But I don't recognize people.
And I love your flights at 8. You have to be there by 7:15.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the mark or the
Thank you.
I've never taken the mark.
Well, the Amtrak should one in 7. Obviously, some people come from privilege.
Oh, God.
But just kidding. No, the mark.
What
Yeah, I can do it.
type well with? My supervisor for.
You're gonna pay for that.
I think my supervisor just talked to me.
I say that because every time I go, someone else pays. Someone pays for me every time I go.
Pro-gas law students.
I mean, I'm not.
It's really nice to meet you. Kind of. Is there someone other that I should go?
So we covered. I didn't do it yet. I've been to DC quite a few times. It's not the first time I've been here.
Cherry blossoms are very blossomy. For a lot of tourists, by the way.
That's what. Yeah.
I had to go. I had to come into town this weekend for a showing.
You work
for
on
a showing.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't
I mean, if
easy
you
the
want to
first
live in Capitol Hill, there's a few decent spots open.
Well, the people I'm living with have like limits and things like that. I want a yard. There will be 3 dogs in my house, and I want a yard. So yeah, having a yard in DC makes it.
We have a yard, but it's
not 3 dogs. Do you have a 3-dog?
I mean, you have 2 dogs in a small apartment, so yes. You're talking about 3 dogs in a yard, yes.
First experience.
But I was up by Gallaudet on M Street, found this really nice fucking place, but it was after brunch. All these fucking
subscribers also
showing with
steaks.
stuff. That's fun. I gave it to a couple because it's easier to manage. Two tenants instead of 5. I'm like, dude, there's only 3 people living. So I'm going to showings by myself.
I was like, all right then. My God, just learned a lot.
I know that. I want to do it by myself, obviously, but people want to be involved in the decision.
Who are the other 2?
Jessica.
That's right, Jessica.
And who is some friend who found out we were looking for a place. Like, I need a place.
I have no idea.
Not one of the guys I met.
Probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say Ben sounds familiar.
He has a girlfriend. I don't know. She helped her on the last place, so he doesn't get all the emails. His girlfriend was one of the people that came to the showing. Just talking way more to so yeah, it's not going great. Worst comes to worst, I'll hit you up by myself. Sure, you got a couch. I'm just.
In the future, you guys start better.
I'll shoot you a copy of the
junk.
I was wondering what was in there.
So,
Like dead bodies.
Apparently, they used to rent it out to an intern.
You have my email, right? You recently.
Yeah.
With no air conditioner?
It's okay.
I mean,
Just find a used portable air
for a
conditioner.
place on Capitol Hill,
It's fucking wrong.
Which client is he doing? I've gotten.
well, like they're robbing us.
No, probably the person they get.
$600 without AC.
The rest of the house.
Can you even
The rest of the
rent
house.
things without AC?
No.
I didn't think so. That was
There's
illegal.
definitely under the table.
It's been 12 hours.
Why more than you have?
Yeah.
Pretty sure I follow that.
I'm not very good at this aspect.
I don't
And
practice
he's the
law.
winter.
That's not why I'm
And
here.
he's the winter and water.
Like I said, good luck finding anyone else to live in Capitol Hill for $600 a month.
I'll figure it out. It will be fine, probably. You know what that is?
I looked at Petworth. There's some promising places in Petworth. I've gone all over Alexandria.
Is there flavorful hot sauce or is it just hot? I don't like just hot.
That I don't know.
I'll live in Arlington. I don't care. But one of the stipulations is it has to be close to the
Spicy
metro.
things, but only if they're like flavor very spicy.
What?
Metro in a yard. There's a little bit of flavor, but it doesn't smell like the kind of hot sauce that's like.
Close to the metro.
Let's pass.
And he pays. So all that will.
Let's just give nice taste. It just tastes like cool flavor. So there are some Korean hot sauce.
I can't say anything. Also, Jim's a really cool guy. I don't want to mess him off. He likes me. That's rare. mean, I have a job at this firm if I want it. I don't want to work.
Oh, not far at all. You live close to Annandale.
Hopefully, I get to go to South Africa.
That's right.
Oh, no.
And have an internship over there.
Not
Hopefully.
in downtown Annandale,
And
where
then go back home and live there.
close to the community college, or I used to.
Cost a lot. Fuck out of here. So I don't have to pay back my mom. Yo, no one is on this train with me. Like, just don't
Yeah,
pay
you
it
mentioned
back.
that before. It's like
No one's on it with me. It's so sad.
default on my student loan.
If everyone defaults, everything goes under and we get bailed out. Just
I'm
like
down if
banks.
everybody's gonna do it, but everybody has to do it at the same
Everybody
time
has to do
because I
it.
can't be like, yeah, we're gonna do that, and I don't pay, and everybody's like, oh, it's like I paid.
There's too many pussies out here. I went that whole thing without using profanity. I'm pretty sure.
I
Maybe,
noticed.
maybe I
actually.
used one.
You didn't. I noticed it.
It's called being an adult. You'll learn about it.
I'm working on it.
Now I'm all over.
If you need any tips, let me know.
Whenever I need to know how to be an adult.
I'm the
You will be
most.
the first person I
I'm
come
the
to.
most adult.
You will
of
be the
adulting
first
that I've
person I
ever
come
adulted
to.
in my life right now.
Unless it's like a.
So.
I can't give anybody any shit for anything because our kitchen light is broken. Like we have one overhead fluorescent in our kitchen at home, and it has been for a month now. So we just
Why
don't
don't you
use
just
our
call
kitchen
someone?
when the sun sets because
call
we really like need to clean before we have the landlords in, and we don't do that because it's always dark.
Why don't you just call someone else? Just pay someone.
Because I'm already
The
paying
MARC
rent.
train
I'm
is
gonna make
just
them
as good as
fix
the
it.
Amtrak, and it's cheaper. Yes.
Candles are just as good as
I
like.
don't know. Amtrak has a silent call.
There's a silent car?
Yeah.
Like where you can't talk?
Yeah.
That is
I'm pretty sure the first car in the market is silent too.
I forgot how far away Richmond is. Like, oh, it'd be like an hour and a half. No, wrong.
Amtrak goes
No,
farther.
3 hours.
Oh,
It was so bad.
That makes sense. Yeah, Amtrak's only 14 though.
No, I'm pretty sure it's 21.
You go to the same station though, right next to BWI.
Yeah, it's on the same track. What are you?
Look, I've taken the train like twice.
Yeah, that's why whenever I go to Florida, I always fly BWI because it's like $100.
$100. That's what I was just telling her. I saw flights in a road trip from
Right.
When I drive through,
I just got a flight yesterday to Atlanta for $50.
Nice.
I mean,
Spirit?
yeah,
Round trip?
one way.
That's still fucking good.
Yeah.
But yeah, $58 to go to fucking Atlanta.
What airline?
It's always gonna be Spirit out of
Terrible.
BWI.
They're terrible.
Cheap Southwest flights right now. They fly
Southwest
all-
doesn't fly a ton out of BWI though.
I count that as sort of like my
They have a whole fleet.
If it's no traffic,
it's
it's no
Boeing stocks kill.
time.
Boeing's a great company to work for as a lawyer. It's not my thing. But no, my trip to Florida in July I think cost me $89. And that's to Orlando.
You have another thing you have to do today, or are you done for the day?
I have lunch.
I'm flying into Orlando because I have to go to St. Augustine for a wedding.
You get
And I have to fly out of Orlando because I go to St. Augustine.
I'm salaried, so
Oh, that's awesome. So if you're done for the day, you're done.
yeah, I'm done.
Why is that face?
It's in a place I've never heard of.
Basically,
Oh, I saw that invitation.
Yeah,
Where?
being
like Leesburg.
No, it's not. We've all heard of Leesburg.
or getting paid.
It's like Leesburg. Small town in the middle of nowhere outside of Orlando. Trees everywhere.
Popka?
No,
No,
it's one where I hadn't heard of it either. I looked at it. I was like, what?
Tavares.
So many hours.
It's Ferris? Because that I have heard of.
I think it's Tavares.
There's more out
Tavares?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would know. Maybe you're not as Florida as you think.
It's just stated AMI in
Like the
Lakeland.
last 26 years of my life there.
AMI in Lakeland. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. AMI, Sarasota.
You gotta travel a bit more.
St. Pete.
When you feeling feisty.
Did a side stint in Tallahassee for a few years.
That's a horrible place. Tallahassee is probably my least favorite place in all of Florida.
Really? Because I hate Jacksonville.
No.
Jacksonville has Jack's
Been to
Beach.
Gainesville?
Oh, Gainesville sucks too.
Gainesville
Fair point.
Huh. Tallahassee, Gainesville. My two nicknames. So,
I'm good.
No, Tallahassee.
I agree.
I mean, I'll go to Tallahassee if they're hiring.
Oh, see, that's I mean, I just want to go to college now.
I would love to. I like to. I've always loved it. Live out in Thomasville?
Leon County sucks.
Yeah, that's not great.
We're from Polk County, guys.
Yeah, we're
I
from
mean,
Polk.
I fucking love Polk County, and I'll rep that shit till I die.
I'm just saying we're comparing like terrible counties in the state.
Nah, dude,
Leon and Polk are like.
Because Polk County has good land out by Winter Haven.
So does Leon.
So I drive down every day to
Everywhere except for the city center. Everywhere.
You might actually have
Fucking nightmare. Oh my god.
It's amazing, and I'm brilliant. As long as I clear my record, I could be anything. I could be anything for anyone.
We need you to clear that face.
For real. Just believe it. Also, you can grow. You can learn and grow.
Learn and grow.
That's the move. Millennials haven't figured. Yeah, old people don't realize that. If you're a millennial.